few days before Eid Al Adha, the Feast of Sacrifice begins on Wednesday, June 28th. Several Muslims have descended on Saudi Arabia for the Hajj. They include these 250 Muslim pilgrims who were part of history as Uganda Airlines operated its maiden flight to Saudi Arabia this past week. Eid Al Adha, one of Islam's two main festivals, marks the climax of the annual pilgrimage. This is when Muslims slaughter cows, goats, sheep and camels to commemorate Prophet Ibrahim's willingness to sacrifice his son Ishmael at Allah's request. Saudi Arabia's meat consumption per capita stands at 50 kilograms, which is among the highest in the world according to GoldsteinResearch.com, a trade journal that is bullish about the growth of meat consumption in Saudi Arabia, citing the feast of Eid Al Adha as a factor. This year, however, the fighting in Sudan has disrupted cattle and meat supplies to Saudi Arabia, inflating domestic prices ahead of Eid Al Adha. On account of ongoing hostilities, Sudanese airspace is closed to most flights and commercial shipping via the port of Sudan is at a standstill. In 2020, according to a report by Sudan Now Khartoum, Sudan exported at least 20 tons of red meat to Saudi Arabia. According to a tradingeconomics.com report citing the United Nations Comtrade database, Saudi Arabia imported meat and offals from Sudan worth $30.63 million, the highest volumes on record since 2015. This followed a decision in 2020 by the Saudi Arabian government to lift its ban on meat imports from Sudan due to verifications that animals from Sudan were disease-free. Sudanese meat exporters, according to a May 23rd Reuters report, forecast that meat importers will diversify beyond Sudan should the war continue at their expense. Saudi Arabia's decision to lift the ban on Ugandan beef gives credence to these fears. According to a June 16th report by Gulf News, Saudi Arabia has lifted its 22-year ban on meat imports from Uganda. The Saudi Food and Drug Authority reportedly lifted the ban after reaching an agreement with Uganda on health and quality standards relevant to meat imports of cows, sheep, goats and their products. The ban has been in place since 2001. Following an outbreak of foot and mouth disease, the lifting of the ban is contingent on several quality assurances whose details are unconfirmed at the time of reporting. Saudi Arabia is a net importer of meat products as it produces at least 15% of the beef and veal it consumes, importing the rest. On the face of it, this presents an opportunity for Uganda, where the livestock sector accounts for 4.3% of GDP, according to a 2022 report by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Uganda's beef is favored by connoisseurs due to its yellow fat, low cholesterol, and high fiber. With 14.2 million cattle, 11.9 million of which are raised for meat, cattle is the most critical livestock subsector. Most of the cattle is found in the cattle corridor that stretches from Ankole in the southwest to Karamoja in the northeast. In fact, the highest concentration of cattle is found in Karamoja. Uganda has a comparative advantage in relation to Saudi Arabia as a net exporter of livestock. The livestock sector contributes between 1 and 1.5% to Uganda's export value, although this is primarily through dairy and eggs, with meat and meat products minor in comparison. This is attributed to foot and mouth disease, which restricts access to markets such as Saudi Arabia under guidelines set by the World Organization of Animal Health. Government interventions to boost the production and export of livestock products include vaccination to control vectors and diseases, disease surveillance, and attracting foreign investment in meat processing plants. Case in point is the $11 million modern abattoir in Luwero district, financed by the Egyptian firm known as Egypt and Uganda Food Security, launched with much fanfare by President Museveni in 2016. However, Ugandan exports of frozen beef have fluctuated and actually declined from a peak of $804,000 in 2018 to $510,000 in 2020. For added context, the agricultural sector's contribution to tax and non-tax revenue in the financial years 2019-2020 to 2021-2022 was a paltry 1%. Despite the government prioritizing agro-industrialization. In the financial year 2023-2024, the government allocated 1.5 trillion shillings to agro-industrialization, an increase on the 1.45 trillion allocated in the previous year. The relatively low rate of return from the beef industry exemplifies the agriculture sector's chronic underperformance.
How do we start to tax agriculture, commercial agriculture? I've told you we are investing more money there. 2.7 trillion is going into those areas, but it's not paying tax. People are selling trees in the forest there for 500 million. They go home with the money. They sell from the forest. They count there. Then they go home. People are selling livestock. You just go and stand on your stick and you say, take those ones. They count the money. They go home. We must change the conversation.
There are a handful of certified exporters, such as Fresh Cuts, which at one time produced 300 to 700 kilograms of meat products daily, according to 2016 data from Uganda Investment Authority, and exports to regional markets, Europe and the Middle East. There are an average 2 to 4 fresh and frozen beef and hides and skins exporters a year, according to data from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. The Egyptian abattoir and pearl meat industries are among the locally based beef exporting firms. Data on the industry, it must be said, is hard to come by, as much of the trade is yet to be formalized. Industry insiders, however, remain bullish.
Uganda exported the meat worth $6 million to local and international market, to regional and international markets, and then much of the exports went to the countries in such as DRC Congo, South Sudan, Oman, Qatar, and to some extent the United Arab Emirates. So we hope that we shall grow our exports to $200 million by the year 2027.
This high concentration of exporters is attributed to the arduous certification process, which is far too costly for most. Regarding the compliance and certification unique to accessing the Saudi Arabian market, Ugandan-based exporters require halal certification from Saudi Arabia, as it doesn't recognize similar certification from the Uganda Muslim Supreme Council.
Already we have a platform where we can communicate and be able to share requirements. For example, the Saudi Bureau of Standards is now able to say that, okay, Uganda National Bureau of Standards, for products coming from Uganda, please ensure you check for 1, 2, 3, 4 to make sure that they meet our market. So that is the opportunity we have, because we are members of the same body of the Standards and Metrology Institute for Islamic Countries.
A 2022 U.S. Department of Agriculture report entitled Food and Agricultural Import Regulations and Standards reveals that only meat products slaughtered in halal certified slaughterhouses can be exported, and exporters are responsible for food safety throughout the value chain.
No, we also treat animals just like human beings, and the challenge is that when you administer a drug or treatment to these animals, it has to have some window for these drugs to disappear, to clear in the body. So one of the interests of the export market is that they must be free of what? Of the remnants of these drugs, which we call the drug residues. So our laboratories are able to test for that to ensure that they are free of that.
Further, the Saudi Food and Drug Authority regulations require a health certificate approved by a competent authority confirming that cattle was not fed with animal feed containing animal protein, fat, or animal waste. Also, animals should not be treated with any substances that stimulate hormonal activity and growth stimuli. If the shipment contains frozen meat, the period that has elapsed from the date of slaughter until the arrival of the shipment in Saudi Arabia shall not exceed 4 months, provided that it remains frozen at a temperature not exceeding minus 18 degrees centigrade, until it reaches the consumer. It is in response to these non-tariff barriers that exporters are keen to see Uganda Airlines fly direct to Saudi Arabia. Whereas best practice dictates that exporters receive incentives such as subsidizing the cost of export certification, low interest loans, and import duty waivers on processing equipment. The experiences of Ugandan exporters suggest they assume all the risk and bear all the costs of compliance, which means they struggle to compete in the global market with their counterparts that receive incentives from their governments.
Our sisters in Kenya have access to finance at around 3%. Here in Uganda, the lowest financing you can get is from the Uganda Development Bank, which is around 12%. So all those render us uncompetitive.
Foreign investors with interest in exporting Ugandan beef have been offered tax exemptions on stamp duty, duty exemptions on imports and machinery, yet these incentives have not been extended to local investors.
Who want to produce food, who want to produce beef for export, can now access money. You only pay back at the principal. Government pays the interest. We are finalizing the arrangement, and it is part of this coming budget.
Recommendations for Ugandan embassies abroad to facilitate trade delegations aimed at exposing Ugandan exporters in foreign markets and organizing trade fairs abroad to that effect are yet to be fully implemented. In the interim, the private sector has initiated market efforts in partnership with the government.
A market testing for the Serbian market with value-added beef products. This initiative is being championed by PASAID, and the President of Uganda will launch a trade hub in Serbia called Uganda Connect Hub, where we are taking their high-value meat products called the beef biltong. They're introducing it to Serbia, and we hope that from Serbia it will be able to reach other Balkan countries in Europe, what we call the Balkan region.
As a matter of urgency, Uganda needs to accelerate progress towards achieving the foot and mouth disease-free zone status. Progress is hampered by inadequate resources to procure vaccine and drugs.
MAIF was procuring 1.5 million doses of vaccine, FMD vaccine. And when we intervened and basically requested that FMD be treated as an epidemic, there was a budget increment, a supplement to MAIF, and right now they've been able to procure 3.5 million doses.
Inadequate veterinary lab services and inadequate awareness of livestock disease control across the value chain.